Has anyone seen this week the video of Coldplay's song, All My Love, featuring Dick Van Dyke? Anyone? Okay, a bunch of people, not everyone. It's a new song. It's on the new album of Coldplay, Chris Martin. And it was released this week, a video of the song, in anticipation of Dick Van Dyke's 99th birthday, which was yesterday, December 13th. Chris Martin, the lead singer of Coldplay, sings the song at a piano, which is in the backyard in the Malibu home of Dick Van Dyke, which, by the way, there were fires there this week and they were evacuated, and thank God they're safe, and even their cat is safe. Throughout the video, scenes of Dick Van Dyke in his TV shows and movies appear throughout the song. That would be familiar, I think, to many of us. Van Dyke, who was 98 when the video was shot, it was shot in October. I did my research. He also dances on this patio in his backyard home, and he mimics the dances that are shown in the scene, of course, from Mary Poppins, and some of the scenes from the Dick Van Dyke Show with Mary Tyler Moore. It's super charming. And at one point, his large family, his wife, children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, come and flood the dance floor and give him hugs in celebration and joy. At one moment during the course of the video, although it stops at various moments to hear him speak, the video pauses and Van Dyke reflects on his life. He says, "I'm acutely aware that I could go any day now, but I don't know why it doesn't concern me. I'm not afraid of it. I have that feeling totally against anything intellectual I have, that I'm going to be all right." In the face of his mortality and all the unknown, he speaks with calm and clarity and almost levity. And it seems that he's almost liberated himself from the fear and the worry. Besides loving the song, I've been listening to it over and over again. There is something very captivating about the video. It's filled with love and joy, and it's also a rare articulation of being without fear, that everything will be okay. But most of the time, we don't live in the place of it all be okay. This week's Parashat, Vayishlah, is one in which fear lies at the center. And I just want to explore two of the places where the fear is articulated. The parasha is filled with a lot of scenes, many of which are filled with fear, but they don't actually say the word fear in them. But I'm going to focus on the two times that fear is discussed or articulated. That our fear isn't discussed when it comes to Dinah's rape. It's not discussed when Shimon and Levi go to murder all the people of the town. So it's not that fear doesn't exist in the other parts of the parasha, but I want to focus on the two places where the word yirah is used. The parasha begins with Yaakov anticipating a reunion with his brother Esav, who 20 years ago he fled from after having stolen the birthright. Vayirah Yaakov me'od. Yaakov was greatly frightened. In his anxiety, he divided the people with him and flocks and herds and camels into two camps. Many of the commentators speak about what is the nature of Yaakov's fear. Rashi says that Yaakov was afraid for two reasons. One, lest he be killed in the battle. He's anticipating a battle with Esav. And the second part of his fear is that he might kill. There's a dual fear of Yaakov, that one, he's the victim in the violence with Esav, which he's anticipating, And the second, which is a non-often articulated concern, is that he might kill, that he'd be put in the position of killing, whether it was Esav or someone else. It's an astounding statement by Rashi. The fear isn't only about death at the hands of his brother Esav, but Yaakov is also afraid of what he might become, should he become a killer. He internalizes the danger in both scenarios and wrestles with the sense that the encounter with Esav will be all or nothing, life or death. The fear, the yirah, is a recognition in some way that there is no winning, not if he prevails over Yaakov and not if he loses in the battle. Even if he were to prevail over Esav, Yaakov would be changed forever by having had to kill, and its impact on his soul. There is also another understanding of Yaakov's fear, which I think is particularly compelling, by Professor Yeshaya Leibovitz, who was a famous Israeli philosopher and scientist of the 20th century, which exposes a different fear of Yaakov. He says that Yaakov's greatest fear is that he might be an unredeemable human being. 20 years earlier, Yaakov committed this great sin in many ways by stealing the blessing of his brother. And he is afraid to face his brother, not because of anything his brother did, but because of his own crookedness. Leibovitz sees this in the text in Yaakov's instruction to his servant. Yaakov instructs his servant to present gifts to Esav. He says, "Ve'amarta le'avdecha leYaakov mincha hi shlucha le'adoni le'Esav, ve'hine gam hu acharenu." You shall answer to Esav, "Your servant Jacob's, they are a gift sent to my lord Esav." And Yaakov himself is right behind us. This is in the words of the servant. And then when Yaakov ultimately reunites with Esav, he again says, "El na im matzati v'chen be'einecha, v'lakachta minchati miadi." If you would do me this favor, accept from me this gift, for to see your face is like seeing the face of God, and you have received me faithfully. So we see in the number of psukim, 2 of which I've just shared, that the word mincha is used several times as the word of a gift that Yaakov wants to give to Esav. But in the next pasuk, right after the one I just said, where Yaakov meets Esav and they don't have a battle, but he actually runs to kiss him, Yaakov says the following, "Kachna et birchati." Take my blessing, which has been brought to you, for God has favored me and I have plenty. Instead of the word mincha, the word gift that he's been using all along to say, I have gifts, I'm going to give you gifts, he changes the word mincha to the word birchati, or bracha, my blessing. What an incredibly powerful moment. Yaakov offers Esav a bracha, a blessing, in many ways in place of the blessing that he stole long ago. He faces his fear, his yirah, and confronts his sin. And in some ways, this is what he does when he wrestles with the angel, right? That's that moment symbolizes. His fear is his own unworthiness, and it ultimately gets transformed into something new. And Yaakov also receives a new name with that transformation. So that's one moment of yirah that occurs in the parasha right at the beginning. And it's after the moment where Yaakov meets God and he receives his new name, where the place is called Beit El. It's right after that place is called that we encounter the word yirah once again. They set out, Yaakov and Rachel, from Beit El, and Rachel has hard labor. And then the Torah states, and this is where our triennial reading begins in this today. Vayehi bihakshota belidata vatomer la hamayaleret al tir'i ki gam ze lach ben. When her labor was at its hardest, the midwife said to her, Al tir'i, have no fear, for it is another boy for you. Beyond the assumed pain that Rachel was experiencing that would cause her to be so fearful, many commentators believe that the fear that Rachel was afraid of was that she was going to have a girl instead of a boy. That's what many of the commentators say. Why? Because her labor was so hard, and there was some idea that if you were having worse labor pains, it was going to be a girl. I don't know if we took a survey in here, if that would ultimately end up being the case, but it speaks to, of course, some of the nature of the patriarchy of our tradition, and that's how they explain. But it is interesting, by the way, to say that they don't just attribute to her fear to her pain, her physical pain, and the fear of death that she ultimately will go through, right? They actually give it to something more than the physicality of the pain. Chizkuni offers a meaningful addition to the idea that he thinks about Rachel, and if you think about the first time that she gave birth, how she names Yosef. This is in last week's Parashat. Vatikra et shemo Yosef, lemor Yosef, Adonai li ben acher. So she named him Yosef, which is to say, may God add another son for me. So Yosef, her firstborn son, is named for the hope that she'll have another one. And in a profound irony, of course, Rachel, who cries out also in last week's parasha when she is barren, Im ayin meta anochi, if I don't have children, let me die, actually dies in the childbirth, having the very thing that she prayed for. The midwife, who goes unnamed, of course, in the parasha, was trying to assure her that her prayer was fulfilled, that she got exactly what she asked for, even if it came at the cost of her life. Beyond the fear of pain and death that Rachel experiences, she also experiences, I think, is expressing a fear that everything she thought her life was about, having children, was not really true fulfillment. In fact, this additional son that she prayed for will actually be the cause of her death. Rachel, of course, names her son Ben Oni, the son of my affliction. Of course, Yaakov names him a different name, which is Benjamin. And of course, he is the son of her physical affliction, but he is also the son of her existential fear. I think that her articulated purpose, life's purpose, was in some way misguided. We live with fear all the time. We fear pain like Rachel felt. We fear for our safety like Yaakov. There is obviously the fear of death that stares us in the face, some of us more closely in the face than others at various moments. But for all of us, death is an inevitability, and it makes us feel fearful often. And that is not only true for us as individuals, but we fear for our parents and our kids, our family and our friends. As a parent, I realized the first time that kind of fear when Aiden started to walk and I could see him falling before he fell. Like and I'm not a worrier in general. I worked really hard to not be a worrier from the generations of worry. And just that sense of like that paralyzed fear that something bad is going to happen. And that you can see it, and most of the time he didn't even fall, right? It's just that sense that you can already see it happening before it happens. And also, I fear it's not for the weary of heart to learn how to parent children when they themselves are feeling fearful. How do you stay steady when you have someone with you, particularly your children, and they are themselves fearful? These fears are also true for our community, our country, and our people. With the rise of anti-Semitism, many of us are living with fear for our safety on the streets, for our kids on college campuses. In our own country, particularly with the incoming administration, many are fearful for their bodies and their lives, women and LGBTQ folks, migrants and refugees. And of course, in Israel, all sense of safety and security was shattered on October 7th. And we are in ongoing fear for what the 100 remaining hostages in Gaza are experiencing, those that are alive, which are assumed to be like 64 or so. Let's hope. Writ large, our day-to-day living is amidst such brokenness, uncertainty, and fear. In just the last week, the barbaric Assad regime fell, adding an additional layer to the precariousness of the Middle East. I think it's a good thing that Assad fell, but now it's like, what's going to be? There is a profound sense of unknown. In our own city, a CEO was murdered in broad daylight, highlighting one more expression of the escalation of political violence in our country and vigilante justice. Many of us feel afraid about what lies ahead for our own country and for Israel. There are many ways religious life asks us to placate fears with faith, just like the midwife does for Rachel. Al tir'i, don't be afraid. And I believe deeply faith is one way to move through fear and uncertainty. Faith provides connection with something greater than ourselves. It puts us in faith community, which offers support amidst the shaky ground under us. It instills light in the darkness and points us toward yearning for tikkun, for healing, and for redemption. And we have many verses to prove it, just like the nameless midwife who tries to comfort Rachel by saying, Al tir'i, don't be afraid. Or Yirmiyahu's words, Al tira avdi Yaakov, don't be afraid, my servant Jacob. Or the famous piyut that said on Motzei Shabbat, which is Amar Adonai liYaakov, Al tira avdi Yaakov. God says to Jacob, don't be afraid. And that's the refrain, the whole thing, with all the assurances of what God will do for the people of Jacob, for the people of Israel. Al tira avdi Yaakov, Al tira avdi Yaakov. Don't be afraid, the servants of Jacob's. All the assurances that it will be okay. Or the rings and necklaces that many people wear that says, Gam ze yavor, this too shall pass. But we know that fear actually doesn't pass. It's alive with us every day. And for Yaakov and Rachel, beyond the physical fear they encountered, I think the fear that's expressed and the commentators dig into is actually important fear. And it asks them and us in many ways to raise deep questions. For Yaakov, he understood that the fear that there was just as many consequences to being the winner in the war as there was to be the loser in the war with Esav. And the understanding that the implications of the dynamic that he had been in with Esav would leave them as both losers if it was one size, if it was either the winner or the loser. And the fear helped him wrestle with his demons and ask if he was capable of transforming his crookedness and open up to his mistakes and own them and move forward. Fear can be a very motivating factor for us. And even with her last breaths, Rachel faces her own mortality. She wrestles with the question, I think, about what the true purpose of her life was. Or in Rabbi Harold Kushner's book, which always has stayed with me, When All I Ever Wanted Wasn't Enough. All she ever wanted was children, Rachel. That's the only thing, and obviously she was born in a society and towards that was women's worth. But sometimes we have to ask the question, is that what I really want? What am I truly praying for in my life? What is true fulfillment? And who am I meant to be? Who are we meant to be? Many times we think that yirah, fear, is an excuse or a reason not to do the hard things. I'm afraid, so I shouldn't have to do that. We're in physical danger, so we shouldn't ask any questions. Fear gives us a chance to say, put the questions off because we're afraid and we can't deal with this. But in many ways, I think these moments in this week's parasha highlight the fact that being fearful is one of the most powerful places to ask questions. It's a ripe spot to deal with the deep things that we're dealing with. After all, yirah in our tradition is also translated as awe, not only fear. And Yamim Noraim, the high holy days, are also understood to be the days of awe, are filled with fear. Many of the images of the holiday, of course, are fearful ones, like Unatan Tokef, who will live and who will die, right? The notion of being in the fear of that moment of those days is to wake us up to what is most essential. Perhaps we will have fleeting moments of shleimut like Yaakov does in this week's parasha when it says that Yaakov came to Shechem Shalem. He has a brief moment of being complete. But of course it doesn't last long. But you kind of touch it right there that he is, actually the tradition says that he is complete in body and soul. And Bezrat Hashem, with God's help, we, like Dick Van Dyke, might reach an old age feeling full and grateful and unafraid and loved and loving, even though, by the way, he didn't have a simple life. And I hope and pray that we do, that we have that everyone will live a long life. We know that many do not. And for those, all those other days and hours and minutes that we have, that we live with fear because we can't make it go away, it is a part of the human condition. I hope we will not only have the faith to move through it with hope, but the audacity of faith to ask where we really truly are, to ask hard questions when we feel afraid. What is the fear that we are really feeling? And not only as individuals, but also as a Jewish people. I think this is something that is deeply alive right now, that as a Jewish people, we could dismiss the hard questions for the safety of our people, which is real. It's not that we are not experiencing hardships as a Jewish people with anti-Semitism, with the questions about what it means to be a country surrounded by a lot of enemies. But that is not an excuse to not deal also with who we want to be and what is our purpose. There's a pasuk in the book of Devarim that says, "V'yitzavenu Adonai la'asot et kol hachukim ha'eleh, L'yirah et Adonai Eloheinu letov lanu, kol hayamim, l'chayotenu kehayom hazeh." And God commanded us to do all these statutes, to fear Adonai our God for our good always, that God might preserve us alive as it is at this day. I pray and hope that our fear is used for the good, and that we think of that trembling that we often fear day in and day out, that somewhere in our heart and our soul is not only used to try to protect us, but also is used for the good, to ask and search for the places of who we want to be individually and collectively as a people. Shabbat Shalom.